Today we've got Steven Bragg from Pitcher Partners. Steven explains some of the key challenges in the auto industry and provides great advice for OEMs and dealers and consumers.
Let's jump into it.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies and original equipment manufacturers. Please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
I've been a big fan of yours for some time.
Oh, thank you.
I like your research and I like the way you go about it. It's an honour to have you on our show.
I do tend to have opinions and I'm not afraid to usually say what they are. So, I don't know if you saw the recent article in Go Auto about the Benz MD writing to the dealer council.
I'm very curious to get your thoughts on that, Stephen.
My biggest concern is that dealers run the risk of being marginalized by the OEMs. And I think how this happens is through the agency model. And how that is because dealers are basically handing over their customer base to the OEMs for what is no compensation. And the OEM keeps them on as agents until they consider them unnecessary to be remaining in the value chain. I think the key here is that dealers forget the value that they bring to the table. I don't think they do, but I think it needs to be said. So they've got 3 main things going for them. They've got large customer bases that exist within their workshops. They have very strategic and well-established facilities and key locations to service their customer base. And they've got the people and processes, and they know how to sell, particularly they know how to sell cars, obviously, and take care of their customers. In reality, what the OEM, in my view, and it is reductive, but what the OEM brings to the table is stock. When you think about it, really, all the OEM brings to the table for the dealer is stock to sell. So if I was a dealer, or if I was a dealer council, or if I was the AADA, or if I was the AADA board, I'd say, well, what would Jerry Harvey do in this situation? Rather than handing his business on a platter to his suppliers, think about Jerry Harvey in this situation. Jerry would take what are his 3 key assets: the customer base, the strategic and well-established facilities, and people and processes that know how to sell. He would then go to the suppliers and negotiate a deal. He would sell that stock in his stores. I think the important thing here, in particular when the OEMs, especially agency OEMs, start coming to the dealers and saying, there's no need for a dealer council, or we don't need to talk to you, we want to just deal with you individually, to me that raises a lot of red flags. So I think the AADA and the dealers need to create what it needs to be some sort of buying body. They create their own Harvey Norman platform by pulling their customers, their premises, their locations, their facilities, and their people to create a massive buying group. Take that, and then you go out and source the stock. So think about the 2 sides of the coin. Stock without customers is a liability. Customers without stock is an opportunity. So dealers actually have the opportunity, and they have the upper hand in this situation as long as they don't give it away. If all the dealers in Australia basically went and created a buying group, offered exclusive representation in their showrooms to OEMs that they want to represent, so then rather than representing 70 brands in Australia to sell 1 million cars, we're representing 20 brands in Australia to sell 1 million cars. I think it gives a much better outcome for the dealer, gives a much better outcome for the OEM, much better outcome for the customer, because you actually get OEMs and dealers who have enough volume and, I guess, scale to be good. So in perspective, think of Toyota. Toyota is probably the only brand in Australia that has enough volume to actually act like an OEM versus other OEMs that are represented in Australia and they might sell 1,000 units, 2,000 units, 10,000 units. What's the cutoff for an OEM to make it viable? And that's an easy equation for an accountant to work out. I could tell you what that answer is, and most of the OEMs know what that answer is, because outside the top 10 doesn't really make a lot of sense, but you'd probably say the top 20 it would be the cutoff. You can actually get product to the market, which makes a lot of sense. Dealers could then, and OEMs could actually price the product at the right levels for the market to make it competitive. Think of it this way. Imagine being Toyota and on 1 July, every existing dealer stopped selling your cars and they started selling MGs, for example. How long would it take them to actually replicate the dealer channel that they built? You actually can't. I don't think you could rebuild the Toyota dealer network in Australia. All of the digital marketing in the world just won't sell them these cars. So I think the important bit is the dealers have all the power in this situation. They just don't realize it. That's my point around this whole thing, because I think the AADA were trying to say it in a much nicer way, but honestly, OEMs without dealers, in my view, it's a big issue. Selling is a people business, and dealerships and dealer businesses are people businesses. So forever, you're going to need this interaction that will have a transaction between people. And as much as people say that they won't, history has proven, and even the future has proven, that people want to buy cars from people, and they actually want to see the car before they buy it. And that's 100% true, and it will be for as long as the sun keeps coming up and going down every day.
And I think that last point is exactly it. People buy from people. And I think that's the most important point. There's that relationship. If you don't have the relationship, there's nothing.
It's pretty much standard for us, isn't it? It's numbers game, people business.
Yeah.
So it's all about the numbers, but the numbers don't happen unless the people do business with people.
Yeah.
Whether it's B2B, B2C, B2G, it still is people doing business with people. People buy from people they trust. People buy from people they like. Relationships are important. Honesty and trust ultimately comes down to trust. We'll trust someone that you can look in the eye and do a deal with, as opposed to do an online digital transaction that, am I going to get the car?
And I totally agree. A lot of the research is taking place online. I think a lot of the transaction will happen online, but there will always still be a dealership. There'll still always be a rooftop. There will be a delivery point. I actually don't think cars will be delivered to houses. To me, logically, doesn't make a lot of sense. I get the idea of when it becomes autonomous. I think autonomous potentially, electric and autonomous would completely change the game. I think electric is going to change the game for everyone. And I think that's the next big move. And that's the next big change that everyone needs to be aware of, as in dealers and OEMs. When it does go electric and autonomous, then yeah, the world's changed. We're not driving cars anymore. It's a whole different ballgame. You actually don't even own a car. You're basically buying a service, some sort of mobility play. But yeah, up until that point, which I think is a long way away, based on everything I've read recently, it's at least 30 years, maybe 40 years away before we see robo-taxis out and about.
I think 70% of batteries are made out of China. So basically the battery is the same in every car.
Yeah.
And so there's all become basically a commodity. So you just order your car and it will get delivered to you and you change it in 2 years or 3 years. And that's in another one. They're not even sure whether the electric vehicles is a full solution because of all the issues around mining.
I read 2 articles recently that go to your point there. So Musk and his team have apparently worked out how to produce electric vehicles around 50% cheaper. Now that's a bit of a game changer, because recently I wrote as to why basically electric cars aren't economical in any sense. I think that the prices will start to come at parity. And when that starts to happen, that's when you start to get cost parity with ICE vehicles, and people will, I think, adopt EVs in droves. But secondly, I think it was one of the US think tanks. There's a professor there, and he's written basically mining in all history of mining, the most it's ever increased in 1 year is 10%. And the increase we need in rare earths, lithium, cobalt, all that sort of stuff to produce the amount of batteries we need is something like 1,600% year on year. So we actually cannot dig the stuff out of the ground quick enough if it exists. So to your point, your very first point there, EVs aren't the solution. I think they're part of the solution. And I think that's the bit that needs to get across to everyone out there who's just really pushing the EV theme and the EV mandate. Importantly, I think the government needs to listen to this, because the government's really gone down this EV path of zero emissions via EVs. McKinsey's backed it up. I wrote an article a few weeks back basically showing that EV batteries and EV cars around 65 to 70% more polluting to produce in the build phase than an ICE car. And on average, it takes something like 8 years to basically pay back from an emissions point of view. So they're not economical, and they pollute more if you include the build phase. Obviously, in the use phase, they're way better. So if Australia is a true global citizen in this whole CO2 emission and net zero proposition, we need to take that build phase piece where these batteries are very dirty to produce. And if just Google some of these mines and places where they produce batteries, it's pretty horrific. And I'm not saying we shouldn't go EV. I'm saying we got to find a better way. And EV's a solution, but it's not the solution. There's got to be other ways to get to where we need to go. Even if, for example, you're looking at hybrids and plug-in hybrids, I think the batteries are a quarter of the size of a typical Tesla. So you could produce 4 batteries for 4 cars versus 1 battery for 1 car. And then when you start looking at, and it gets really bad when you look at the Utes, like the F-150 Lightnings, the Hummers, and those giant. Those are like, apparently those are like 8 times the size of a normal battery. And I think the proposition of those things barreling down the road and running into a traditional ICE vehicle is a bit scary as well. As heavy as those things are, they're very, very heavy. And I don't know how the insurance is going to be able to handle all this stuff. Yeah, so there's a lot of problems to solve. But when you look at problems, I see opportunities. This is where dealers and OEMs can really start to make their mark in this whole situation. And I think it's a good thing, and we should all really start pushing towards it. But the important bit is just I think we should be logical, understand what's happening, take your time. Don't push one solution as the solution. I think the EV thing really needs to, they need to push the brakes a little bit, in my view.
Well, I think Europe have started to push back, and there was a lot of announcements about 2035 was going to be that all ICE vehicles would have to be replaced. But now even they're starting to put a pushback and say they need the industry industry to come with a solution of how to get there and maybe even extend that times. So I think that's starting to happen. It'll be interesting to see where that goes to.
Well, and I think importantly, we haven't even really spoken about the infrastructure required as well. And that's the big missing piece. Power generation, for example, power generation in Australia and a lot of Western countries is still quite dirty. We use a lot of coal, we use a lot of gas. So we got to find a solution to the power generation conundrum. One, there isn't enough power, and two, when we do produce it, the base load stuff that we produce is very dirty. And then I think even more importantly is the actual poles and wires. So the infrastructure, the grid itself just can't handle having all these cars hooked up to it. And we're going to start really seeing some knock-on effects from that. If I live in the suburbs, I live in Cronulla in Sydney, because I've been working with an electrical engineer from the University of Michigan. He's an Aussie guy. He's quoted to me on several occasions that each residential block in the US will cost at least $1 million to convert the grid, to upgrade it. And they're estimating something like $1 trillion per state in the US. So you could probably easily just equate that to Australia. So $1 trillion per state, at least on the Eastern Seaboard. So you're talking, $4 trillion roughly to upgrade the grid. And then, quite a bit of money and time to upgrade the power generation. So the time and money aspect of this hasn't really been thought through well. Governments pass laws and rules and regulations saying no more emissions out of tailpipes by 2035. And Australia still hasn't really announced where they're heading. We think they're just going to copy Europe and go 2035. Yeah, I don't know how we get there. I mean, it's only 12 years away, and 12 years sounds like a long time, but in the infrastructure game, it's not that long.
Not at all. Steve, they're fascinating topics that we're talking about, because I think that the agency one is a very valid one. And I think you touched on one that is very important, and one that we talk about a lot, is the viability of an OEM. And John and I have worked in a couple of large OEMs, but also small OEMs, and the tipping point always was very much from the overseas perspective, is that you got to get to 1% share. Anything below 1% share, your overseas masters say you're in the danger zone. Yeah. And this is where we see brands that are sub 1% will either often transition in and out of the country. They'll come in as a national sales company, or they'll sell to an importer or a just general distributor. Yeah. So it's interesting, that whole rationalisation. There's a lot of brands come in when tariffs disappeared, and it was very much a free market, with no more protection for local manufacturers, and a lot of brands rushed in, because it seems to be a very attractive market. It's a mature market, and one that you can carve out a niche if you get it right. But the big bogey is always exchange rate. So depending on what your ebbs and flows with your exchange rate, and also with your cost of production and where you're sourcing your product, they're the keys for the OEMs in that sub 1% share, which is often the danger zone. But I'm keen to ask, what are the key levers that OEMs and dealers should use to drive their profitability, and why this will change with the freeing up of the supply of stock?
What dealers and OEMs still have on their side is riding out this wave of demand that was driven by two things during the COVID pandemic. One, cashed up customers who either didn't go on holiday, drew down on super, didn't go, obviously they were locked up, so they were saving money, and they spent a lot of time on the internet looking at new cars and getting excited, so they put down deposits. And then the other one was the undersupply during COVID, which was driven by supply shortages. Those two things have collided to create this god-awfully big order bank that all the dealers are working through. So that they've got that going their way, dealers and OEMs, and that's a massive benefit. So as supply comes, basically with VFAX, you're going to see the sales ride along with supply. So whoever has supply will win the game up to a point, as you'd expect, because at some point the supply meets the demand, and the order books and the over orders sort of start to meet, and then we go back to what we were used to for as long as Adam was a boy. There was more supply than there were cars being sold, and then it doesn't take long for the discounting to come back into play, as you know, and it only takes one person to break rank. And as much as dealers think that they won't, someone will, because they'll be under the pressure that everyone else is under. I think interestingly, recently I've seen some dealer financials, particularly the listed groups, and you're starting to see floor plan interest showing back up in the P&L. Literally, it's something that we just forgot existed. And I know we just now had our 10th straight interest rate rise here in Australia. So we're up to 3.6%. And historically, that's very low, by the way. As much as people think, and they might be whinging and moaning and screaming about how high interest rates are now, we have to remember, and you guys have been around a bit longer than me, but when I was in university, I think the base rate we worked on was 8%. And that was, in the early 2000s, 2001. I think the important bit is interest rates are going to go up. They're going to go up further. We can expect, I think in my mind, interest rates to be around that 4 to 5%. I think when I first came to Australia in 2003, dealers were paying around that 7, 8, maybe 9% floor plan interest rates. I actually remember when dealers would actually use their excess cash as a deposit against their floor plan because the rate they would get was so good that they didn't put it in the bank. These are the sort of things that dealers are going to start thinking about, because the conditions that are actually propping up their business today are starting to ease. Supply is returning, consumer confidence and the consumer balance sheet is starting to suffer. House prices are starting to drop. People are starting to feel the pinch from inflation and interest rate rises. So I think all this is going to unwind. How do dealers pull levers? I think obviously make hay while the sun shines. We've got another 6 months in my mind potentially for this to go, maybe 12. If you listen to Eagers, they got 2 years. I'm not sure. I think all three of the big listeds had at least 12 months in their order bank as they reported. I don't know. I mean, you guys worked at OEMs. They can produce those cars pretty quick, and they can put them on boats pretty fast, and they can arrive in the country pretty quickly as well. So I think they can work through those order banks as quick as you would think they could. So I think all that will come to an end soon, and that's how it's going to change. I think dealers at the moment just need to continue to have really good practices around their used cars. Watch the pricing of used cars. I think they've already come off quite a bit, significantly in the States and less so significantly here, but in pockets they've come down. I've seen it about 20% with certain brands, certain geographies. I think the important thing looking forward, dealers need to start getting back to basics, looking at their people, training their people. They're going to learn how to sell cars again. We haven't sold a car for 3 years. Look at your processes and look at your expense control. If you're not doing those things right now, you're going to be suffering in 12 months' time, in my view.
Steven, what about the actual orders? Because isn't there a risk? Because you might have this big order bank, but if those people no longer qualify for that loan or finance that deal anymore, there could be a risk in their order bank. Do you think is there a way to go through those big orders, or not really? Is it very difficult to do so?
You're spot on. Depending on who you talk to, I've heard as much as 20% fall over rate at the moment. And that's for a myriad of reasons. Number one, the car's gone through, you ordered it 12 months ago, and the car's gone through 3 or 4 price rises. So the car that you thought you were buying for 50 is now being sold to you for 57, right? So it might be out of your price range. 2, the trade-in you had, which you were quoted on the day, we'll buy that when your new car arrives, and we're going to offer you 30 grand for it. It's now 25, or it might be 20. And then 3, the most important one that I think is you just mentioned, these customers are going to be shocked by how much the interest rates are. The average interest rate at the moment is 10+%. And if you go to a big 4 bank, they're going to quote you around 14, 15. The best place to finance a car at the moment is at the car dealership. And it has been for a while, but car dealers and captive finance companies are offering better rates than the banks right now. And I think that's something the dealers need to really focus on, that they've got the upper hand with the customer to get them set at a better rate. And I think that'll help them get a lot of deals over the line. When you have a triple bogey of price increases, used car price declines, and interest rates going up, and then you add in, my house is probably worth less today than it was a year ago. Every time I go to the grocery, I feel like I need to take out another mortgage. It's going to be difficult to sell. And that's why I said we got to learn how to sell again, because the old days of sitting back and waiting for customer orders to fly through the door are gone. That just it isn't going to happen for a period, hopefully not a long period, but for a period, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be really difficult for dealers.
Now, Steven, where do you see the future of the industry? We're looking at this current bubble that's still a unique bubble, and it's a fantastic one for OEMs and dealers. You've mentioned that it's contracting, and the speed of contraction is the one that depends on what happens from a rate, and you're right, the triple whammy of trade-ins, finance, and also price increases. But where do you see the future going beyond 18 months?
I think, where I see the future, and when we talked about OEMs and where you think the level of OEM volume legitimizes having them to have a national sales company or NSC in Australia, those are all very interesting questions, because where I see the future going is there will be a big shift to EV, because it's legislated. It's going to happen. Even if they don't legislate it in Australia, it's been legislated in the places where cars are built. So unfortunately, we're going to get those cars. Fortunately or fortunately, it doesn't matter how you look at it. The cars you will will be able to buy will be electric, or they'll be something like an electric car. The issue with electric cars, as you would probably already know, is from a standard scheduled servicing point of view, an ICE vehicle needs 5 services. So the customer comes back to your dealership once a year, and they see your service department, they see your parts department, and you actually interact and work with the customer. With the EV, you get 2 services in 5 years. You get one on the second year, and you get one on the 4th year. So the issue I see here is, in particular, so you have around a 20 to 25% drop in labor hours over that period for the customer, ICE versus EV. But importantly, you have about a 60 to 70% drop in parts. So the second year service for an EV is just basically a check, top up of fluids, and off you go. The year 4 service is a more extensive check. They check the battery in bits and pieces, top up of fluids, and then they replace your cabin air filter, and that's it. Off you go. I think the important bit in the next 18 months, importantly, and then for the future, CRM is going to be huge. So OEMs and dealers need to get their CRM watertight. And I think dealers need to get a dealer CRM watertight. I think dealers at the moment probably have a CRM because their OEM tells them they have to have a CRM. They actually need to have a CRM for their OEM, but they also, I think, in my view, need to have a CRM for themselves, which is better than any CRM that exists out there today, because owning the customer is where this is all going to go to. And when EVs and these vehicles get into the market, no one's going to want to own, they will, but they won't. No one's going to want to own an EV in the end, because they're all going to be homogenous. You're going to have you might have a bigger battery, or a longer range battery, or a faster battery, but they're all going to drive the same. There's not going to be a real disparate version of vehicles, if that makes sense. Like an EV6, an iconic 6, and a Tesla Plaid, whatever, the very fast one, they all go the same speed. You push the pedal, the thing flies. It's a light bulb, right? It just goes, and they're fantastic. I've driven few; they're fantastic cars. But I guess the point will be, he who owns the customer, or he or she who owns the customer, will win. And your levers will be probably some slick marketing, but will be more around price. And your biggest lever will be the relationship, the people, the processes, and your CRM that will win the day. I think the switch to EV is where it's going to really change the industry. Going to change the OEMs. It's going to change the distributor. It's going to change the retailer. It's what I just talked about earlier with the servicing and the parts. If you think about the amount of parts that are sold currently by OEMs, that's pretty much a lot of their profit. Not currently at the moment. They're making a lot of money selling the cars, but in history, and you're nodding your head, the profit was in the part.
Absolutely.
So you take the parts out of the equation, what does the OEM do? It's very difficult, right? It makes the economics of the whole, the current franchise model not work. And when you start thinking about the other reasons why there's a franchise model, so there's a franchise distribution model because it was an internal combustion engine that burnt parts and it broke down. The cars broke down. They broke down a lot more than they do now. All cars are very, very, very reliable today, but you still need someone locally representing your brand to fix your customers' issues and to service your customers, because your product keeps breaking down and burning through parts. So if that doesn't exist, do you need dealers anymore? That's why you get the Tesla situation where they're going direct, and the agency situation where more traditional legacy OEMs have to transition from what is a franchise to basically what will be a direct model, or a version of a direct model via agency. I'll hold up my phone, but when's the last time, you can't really see it because of my background, but when's the last time you got this thing serviced? You don't. So I think the point will be, when this stops working, I take it in, I hand it back to Apple, and I say, can I have another one, please? And then they'll go service it and potentially give it or sell it to someone else. So that'll be the same thing that happened, in my view, potentially will be the same thing that happens with a lot of cars, and a lot of customers will treat their cars as a white good almost. They won't bring it in for the second year service. They probably won't bring it in for the 4th year service, because when they bring it in for the 4th year service, they'll hand it back to you and say, give me a new one. So it's the first time the car gets serviced is when they're handing it back to trade it in to buy a new one. CRM, customer experience, all that stuff in between, and dealers need to find ways, and OEMs need to find ways to handle the customer and give experiences. And that's why you're seeing EVs sold at the luxury level, because that's the only place where there's enough margin to do these sort of things. If you're going mass market, if you're MG selling an EV for 35, 40 grand, there's not a lot in it left to have, customer events, customer nights, things like that. That's where it's going. I think if I'm an OEM, if I'm a dealer, I'm really seriously looking at CRM and looking at how I treat customers, how I manage customers, that whole piece for the next 18 months, 5 years, so that when the EV transition really starts to take hold, when it gets over that 25% level of EV uptake, that's when everything starts to change. And at 50%, it's too late. If you haven't made changes by 50%, when you're selling 50% EV and ICE, as a dealer, your business is completely changed and you probably won't be viable anymore. So yeah, now's the time to act.
So, Stephen, just with that, because you've got absorption as a key factor, we're just talking about that's going to disappear. How important then, because is the trade-in and the used car business for a dealer? Because I suppose that's the beauty of the name of a dealer. Dealers buy and they sell. So if we're talking about a dealer and the used car business, is this an opportunity for them to really focus on doing something with that?
That's where dealers will remain dealers. Dealers, in my view, over time will remain a car dealer of their franchise brands, which there will be some that will remain. I think most of the Chinese brands will remain franchised for as long as they can to gain market share because they actually understand that dealers sell cars. But then they will remain dealers, as you said, in their used car business. So their used car business will become more and more and more important. That's where you will have control. And then you'll have representation of all your agency and direct brands where you act as a logistics provider and a delivery point and an experience center. And they're going to rent your premises off you and in some space where they can display some vehicles. The idea of having a salesperson for a direct and agency brand makes no sense. Like, why would you? Because the commissions you get in the marginality of the whole process doesn't make it work. Now, an experience specialist or whatever they're going to call themselves, geniuses, or they give them lots of names, but the person who can give the customer the experience of the vehicle, explain how it works, go through that whole process and deliver a really good outcome for the customer and the brand and the dealer, that's the person that you want. And I think that's where it's going to head. So you're 100% right. Used cars is where it's going to be. And that's where the focus is going to be because that's where the money is. Because service stops where profit ends. That's 100% true. If there's no money in it, why would you do it? And dealers will basically hang on with agency for as long as it still makes money. The second it doesn't make money, they'll shift their focus to something different. They'll work on their franchise brands and their used cars, your used car business, and that's where they'll go. Well, every big group has a used car concept or a used car play within their business. There's a dozen or so out there. And then there's other entrants trying to get into this market like Karma. Yeah, there's heaps of them. And you're going to see more and more of that because that's where the money is going to be.
All these dealers, they're sitting there looking and everybody's saying going to really impact their service business. But how does a dealer really go about carrying his business for the future? Does he look at his capacity and start trying to forecast capacity in his workshop so that he can reduce his facility side and bring in other franchises?
Yeah, exactly that, actually. They actually have to have a plan, which is unusual for dealers. It's very unusual for this industry, having a plan beyond the end of the month and getting through this month. So I think firstly, you look at your people. You look at the people you have in your business and you don't, obviously, don't go out and look at your people and say, I'm getting rid of all these people because they're not going to be the right people for the EV world. There's a transition period here. We got 5 years, maybe even 10 years, depending on how uptake goes to make the change. But look at the makeup of your business. Look at the people in your business. It's a different set of people that you need to have in your dealership. The workshop is going to be the most affected initially, and then specifically over time, the workshop. So the techs you have today need to be trained. They need to be trained to how to service EVs, more like IT guys. Like they're going to be IT guys that can turn wrenches, which would be cool. I think actually it'll be a really interesting job for kids growing up today that you can actually be, working on these high tech, large pieces of machinery, still using your hands, still working, in an environment that is, quite interesting, but then also having a very, very tech aspect to it. So yes, people. Do you need as many people as you have today? No, you're going to need a lot less people. Do you need facilities the same size as you have today? No, you're going to need a lot less facilities. So if you're a big dealer group and say you own 10 dealership sites in a certain area of like a metro area or over a certain geography, you're going to start consolidating all your dealerships onto one site or very few sites. I mean, if you just look at what's happening in Europe, where they've transitioned from single site service centers for each brand to one site with multiple brands, and to the point, and I think I've shared around, and I could share with you, John and Mark. Service centers have 10 or 11 brands on the outside of the service center, because they basically just service all of them, and that's where it's going to go. And then potentially, you might have 4 dealers in a row on Main Strip, say Parramatta Road, for example. They might all just go in together and build a service center for all their brands, and then convert all their other properties into something different. So highest and best use of dealership properties is going to be a huge theme going forward. What are we going to do with these properties? Residential, commercial, schools, hospitals. There's a lot of things you can do with these gigantic sites. So you don't need the big sites anymore, in my view. This again is over time, 10 years plus down the road. And I guess we've seen a little bit of what this is doing to service departments already, having less cars going through, because in the last 3 years, we've sold 600,000 less cars than we would have in a normal trading period. So if you've taken 2019 and just kept it level, we would have sold 600,000 more cars than we did. And that hole of cars that were never sold, which basically basically don't exist now because they're 600,000 cars short for our used car park. It's about a 30% hit in the 23-24 period of those cars that dealers like to service in that 1 to 5 year range. So we're already seeing what that's doing to service departments today. Talk to any dealer right now, they'll say, well, yeah, my service department's not going so well. Well, those are the cars you didn't sell in 2020, 2021, and part of 2022. They're not feeding through your dealership at the moment, and you're not going to service them. So there's already some rationalization around how big does my service department need to be today. Now we're selling 6% EVs. You're not going to service those cars either, in my view. You might repair them if they're damaged or they got warranty issues or they got parts issues, but you're not going to service them. As that EV number, and everyone's going to applaud as we start adopting EVs, but as that goes up, that means something significant has to change at dealerships because you have an entire service department that is probably not needed. You might need half of it. So you start amalgamating, consolidating, and changing those sites to something different. So I'm not saying this is the end of dealers. It's far from it. It's a new opportunity. It's a shift. It's a change. Dealers got to do something different. OEMs have to do something different. It just means that everything's got to change because the model's changed, the customers have changed, the product has changed. So we as the industry have to change, and we should lead that change in the end.
Obviously got a lot of knowledge in the industry. You've worked with a lot of dealers. So why should OEMs and dealers engage with pitcher partners to help address these future challenges in the industry?
I've got a history. I've been in Australia since 2003. Originally worked at Horwath way back in the day. So a lot of people listening to this might know. When I left Deloitte, I went to work for CNH Industrial. And CNH Industrial is Case, New Holland, and commercial vehicles, which were Iveco. So I worked in dealerships at Iveco, and I was the head of finance for Iveco. And I had a couple of ag dealerships as well that I worked in, and I was the head of finance. Plus, I did a lot of the operational stuff. So then I went to KPMG. I didn't learn my lesson from being in the Big Four at Deloitte. I went back to the Big Four again, but then I wanted to go back to my roots, back to the Horwath days when we had the most fun, when I felt like we were doing the best work for our clients. So Pitcher Partners is in that mid-market. We're number 9. We're big enough to matter, but small enough to care, if I can be cheesy. But most importantly, my entire team, everyone's worked in a dealership or they've worked in an OEM. So we actually know what it's like to be on the other side of the table. When I'm telling you this is what you should do, I've actually done it. And I actually know what works and what doesn't work. And I'm not going to tell you something that doesn't work. And I'm happy to take the feedback. I actually understand how the processes work. I know what the people you deal with. I know that half your day or 3/4 your day or your entire day is dealing with HR issues rather than actually doing your job, or dealing with OEMs, or dealing with finance, or dealing with head office. So I get all that. That's why I think we're unique because number one, we're mid-tier. So we're more like the industry. I can move very agilely. I'm very entrepreneurial. I've got opinions. I can actually state my opinions. I don't have my hands and my mouth taped up because I can't say anything because the brand doesn't want me to say that. But more importantly, we've actually walked in your shoes.
Even in terms of your team, are you going to put it in a format that can help dealers because you spoke about them going to have to restructure their business and scale back and cut their showrooms and that. Are you going to be able to offer those type of services too?
Yeah, I mean, that is more traditionally just like strategy type work. So yeah, I won't be the guy that goes in and restructures the team. I'll be the guy who helps you evaluate your business, understand what your needs are, what your property strategy should look like, what your acquisition strategy should look like. Gone are the days, in my view, of acquiring dealerships just to get scale or just to buy more dealerships. Scale is important. Let's not underplay that. Scale is very, very important. Dealer groups need to get very big to survive what's about to happen. And the important thing is when you get through to the other side, if we think we're making good profits today, the profits on the other side of this are going to be enormous because you're actually going to own the customer. Like the most profitable, the most valuable company in the world is Apple. And there's a reason for that because they own you. They own the customer. They actually, and we talked about CRM, we talked about the experience. They've actually nailed it. And if dealers can nail this, if the industry can nail this, there's a lot of profit, there's a lot of revenue in it for everyone. So yes, so scale is important, but scale with a strategy is the important bit. So am I going luxury? Am I going to own this brand for this region? Or am I going to be the biggest dealer in this region? So there needs to be a strategy. Is there a property strategy behind it? Do I have a people strategy behind it? Am I training people? Am I developing my people to be who they need to be when we get to where we want to go? There's just not enough of that sort of thought happening, I think. And then on the other flip side of that, educating customers. There's just not enough educating of customers out there, primarily on just the basics. Customers and people I know, actually, which is quite scary, don't even know what a credit score is. And to me, that sort of stuff is the basics. We need to be educating our customers as to what a credit score is, what is finance, how does it work? Why is it better to finance at a dealership versus a bank? All that sort of stuff. educating customers, educating your and developing your staff is going to be paramount going forward.
Steven, that's super impressive. I've really enjoyed the conversation today. It's great because it actually validates us for a lot of the stuff that we've been saying over the journey in this podcast. And you just summarize and nail it perfectly. So the whole EV conundrum, the finance, that is why it's so important. We actually had a conversation around that and said, well, let's get a finance expert on. And we did a podcast very much on that so that there's understanding, because we found that there was a fundamental lack of knowledge about how finance works within the OEM and also dealer land. You had your F&I guy that knew it, but everyone else was seen as like a dark art. That that's magic over there, so we don't get involved in that. And just how important it is to consider. And even just when you said that floor plan had disappeared off the balance sheet for so long, an interest expense, and it's creeping back. And yet you're right, we vividly remember when there's an oversupply way back in 2017, 18, and 19, that floor plan was a killer for many dealerships. And you had vehicles that were pushing 12 months in age stock. So any margin on that car is eroded in floor plan charges, well and truly. Some of the challenger brands where the vehicles weren't moving quickly.
And I think a really important note is dealers need to, as I think you mentioned, 18, 19, when floor plan and stock was a killer. I think dealers need to start thinking about going back to the old basic of manual release potentially. I was chatting to one of my clients and he mentioned that in the last 4 weeks his floor plan increased by about 50%. Started to see some impact on his grosses. He had too much stock. So, basically you can move on to manual release. Obviously there's a few hurdles you have to jump through there, but it does cost money to go on manual release. In the end, not having that car sitting in your stock for 6 months or 12 months or however long it might, a couple of months, is actually better to pay that fee for manual release. I know that's not going to make any OEMs happy, me saying that, but
no, OEMs hate manual release.
But as a dealer, I think expense management is going to be it'll be back in vogue in July, guaranteed. It'll be back like around July. And actually quite interesting. I've seen a lot more ads popping up recently for car brands. So I think we'll see the resurrection of EFS in the financial year sale. Yes. That'll come back. And the 1% finance deals and the tradie packs and all that stuff. That's all going to come back in my view. And I think dealers for the last 3 years, we haven't cared about floor plan, we haven't cared about stock, but it used to be the old adage, every time you walk past a car, it costs you $25. $30,000 car at 6% floor plan is about $25 a day. So if you walk past that car every single time you walk past it every day, it's $25. So you better sell it. So I think it's really important that dealers start to really think about these things again.
It gets back to John, our first ever podcast, where we talked about you learn good habits in bad times and bad habits in good times.
That's right.
So we've had a little bit of a bad habit time to forget how to sell and not go down that path of actually training our people, because they've just been taking orders and maximizing grosses. So who needs to train them? Well, you're right. It's owning that getting that CRM system and engaging with that customer for that journey, for the new car, the used car, the servicing, and just maintaining that relationship so no one else steals them. That's a critical one. I think that's a really great point and a great value idea that anyone listening should definitely take away.
And I think the good bit is I see a lot of change and a lot of difficult change coming, but through that there's a heck of a lot of opportunity out there. I do see a tie-up between obviously the banks, the power generation companies, so the utilities, the OEMs, the dealers, and all together working together, basically owning the customer payment, owning the wallet, and then just providing a device. There's some interesting concepts out there about this, and I think that's where it's all heading. And you're heading into the micropayment phase of owning car ownership. Like I said, I think you won't be owning a very nice sexy car like it's that's behind Mark. It'll be a bit more homogenous. It might look good, but they're all going to drive the same. They're all going to sort of be really fast and very high performing. But when it comes to what you drive or which vehicle you're in, it'll be more about brand and experience than it's got a loud engine and it goes really fast.
It's spot on, Stephen. No, it's a great, and I think you articulated perfectly the challenges and for the key areas to be concentrating on and be very mindful and aware of.
Not a problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Hopefully you got as much out of the conversation with Steve as we did. It's amazing the points that he raised around EVs, changing business model, maintenance, and already the loss that we've got from a volume perspective in the car park.
If you enjoyed what you heard, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. Thanks for listening.